Hi, I'm Alicia and welcome to my channel Papercraft Secrets. Today I'm going to show you how to create a set of 9 shaker cards using the Mintay Papers Fancy Cards, the Mintay Papers Christmas Chippies, and the Mintay Papers The Sweetest Christmas collection. These 9 cards are perfect for sending out at Christmas time. They're very elegant, quite simple to make, and I'm going to show you step by step how to create them. So the very first thing I did was I took my chipboard, my chippies, and these are like Christmas circle chippies and they're just absolutely the cutest. And I cut them out with my craft knife. You can see that each of these little circles is attached to the main board by a few little bits. So you've got to use your craft knife to just cut those little bits off so that you can get these little circles out nice and easily from the main piece of chipboard. And once I had all of those circles out of the main chipboard, I just took a sanding block and I just sort of sanded a little bit where some of the little joins where I'd cut with the knife were just a little bit rough around the edges. Then my chipboard was all ready to go. I decided to give them a coat of white gesso. So I popped them up onto a little cake cooling tray so that I didn't get them stuck to the table. And I just went through and painted white gesso onto each one. Then I followed that with a little bit of sparkling white sort of paint that I had to give them a little bit of extra sparkle. And I just painted that directly over the top of the gesso once it had dried. I selected the papers that I wanted to use from the Sweetest Christmas collection and I traced around the edges of the chipboard circles and cut them out. If you have a die that you could use, a circular die, you could certainly cut out your circles using a die. I just chose to do it by hand. I chose to cut 3 circles out of my pink paper, 3 circles out of my mint green paper, and 3 circles out of my red paper. And once I had all of those circles cut out, I was ready to glue my chipboard onto these circles. So I just added some glue around the edge of the frame and chose the paper that I thought suited the picture the best. Once I had all of those cut out, my next step was to cut out acetate circles. So I needed 9 of these acetate circles to create my little shaker card elements. I found some chunky snowflakes that I had in my stash and I sprinkled these into each one of my little chipboard circles. And I really loved the colours of the snowflakes with the colours of the papers and the white shimmery paint that I'd used to paint each one. Then I glued the acetate onto the front of the chipboard circles and that created the little shaker card element. It kept all of those little glitter pieces safely in my little shaker card element. It was quick and easy to create, just a line of glue around the edge. and then pop the acetate directly over the top. Once I'd glued all of the acetate pieces on, I took my scissors and I just did a little trim around the edges if there was any little bits of acetate that needed to be cut off, or any little bits of paper that just hung over the edges a little bit because I'd cut my circles by hand. And this was easy. Once the glue had dried, this was really easy to do. My next step was to take the fancy cards. I chose to use 9 of these fancy cards. They come in a pack of 20. It just so happened that I had 9 left in this little book, and I chose to fold them all in half using my bone folder so that I got a nice crisp fold. My plan was to set my shaker card element in the middle of my Christmas card. My next step was to take some glitter cardstock. I had this glitter cardstock in my stash, and it's like a sort of pearl, creamy glitter cardstock. I chose to cut my glitter cardstock to 4 by 6 inches so that when I pop it on the front of my card, I'll have a nice white border around the edge of my card. I lined the edge of the glitter cardstock up with the edge of the fancy card, and I used my scissors to cut along the edge of the design so that I had the same edge for my glitter cardstock. My goal was to have a little white gap in a border line so that you can see the fancy fold card and then you'd see the glitter cardstock. Once that was cut to size, I simply glued that on to the front of the card. I then went through and did that same cutting technique for all of the 9 cards. It does take a little bit of time to do it, but the effect is really worth it. My next step was to cut more of the glitter cardstock, and in this one I'm cutting 4 inches by 5 3/4 inches. Once I had all of those cards cut, I glued them on the inside of each of the cards, and you can see there's no fancy edge on the inside of the card. My next step was to cut my next layer of paper. The measurements for this was 5.5 by 3 3/4 inches. This will fit on top of the card at the front, and again I will cut the bottom edge to add another layer to the front of the card. I chose the same papers. Actually, I just chose the pink paper and the mint green paper for this. You could choose any papers that you want, and even if you didn't have the Sweetest Christmas collection, you could use another Mintay Christmas collection for the creation of these cards. I also use this paper here to continue with my pink and mint theme to cut some papers out of this pink tiled section for the background of my cards, and also to cut some papers out of the wall section to create background papers for my cards. In total, you will need 9 pieces of this paper to go on the front of each one of your cards. Again, I trimmed around the edge of the fancy edge at the bottom of the base of the card to get that same design on my paper. It's a little bit of trial and error in working out how much you need to cut off so that you've got that edge around the paper so that you can see the glitter cardstock peeking through at the back. My next step was to cut enough ribbon for all of the 9 cards. I wanted to use a bright red ribbon so that the color really popped and it gave it that really beautiful Christmas feel. And there's a lot of bright red in the Sweetest Christmas papers, so I felt that this would coordinate with the papers that I've chosen. Once I had each of the ribbons roughly tied on each of the cards, I then spread out the shaker card elements matching the colours of the background. So I was just sort of being a little bit careful about if it was like a blue paper on the inside of the shaker card, I didn't put that on a blue card base. So I just sort of used contrasting colours. And then I added a chipboard sentiment to each of the cards. Once I had the chipboard sentiment and the shaker element glued on, I could then tie the bow and finish the card. My last step was to cut some paper for the inside of the cards to write on. I used the cover of the fancy fold packaging because on one side of the front cover and on the 2 sides of the back cover there's this lovely white wood pattern or design, and this is perfect for putting on the inside of a card to write a message on. I cut that at 5.5 by 3 3/4 so that it fitted in perfectly on the inside of each of the cards. Had used up all of that front cover and back cover of the fancy fold cards, I just turned to my basic book white and I found some white pages that I could use. I liked the brick page because that sort of reminds you of a Christmas fireplace, and I just used other pages that were in the book. I just needed something neutral that I could write my Christmas message on inside the cards. Once I had cut all of those out, I simply glued those on the inside on top of my glitter cardstock so you could see that border of the glitter cardstock which matched the front cover. The last thing I did to decorate my card was I used some glitter glue to go over my chipboard sentiment, and I also used the glitter glue to go over the edge of the circle just to add another bit of sparkle to the card. And that is the cards complete. There's a set of 9 cards. They all have a shaker element on the front. The insides are all decorated. I really like how these turned out. I think they're very classy. Because I used these simple pages, the simple design pages from the collection, they have a sort of minimalist look. I didn't choose to decorate any more, but you could certainly add more decorations if you wanted to. You could add snowflakes, you could add poinsettias, you could add some gemstones to decorate your cards, but I chose to keep mine fairly simple. I really did like the way that they turned out, and they're just something a little bit different and something unique, and definitely a very handmade Christmas card. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial of how to make a set of 9 cards with a shaker element using Mintay chippies, Mintay fancy cards, and the Mintay Papers The Sweetest collection. I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel for many more crafting videos coming up. Thank you so much for watching and have a lovely crafty day.